Reports are on the street that UCF, Cincinnati, BYU, and Houston will be joining the Big 12. Welcome to the Voice of College Football as we break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football anywhere. That's our aim, that's our goal, that's our mission. Please help us build the channel. Hit the like button, share the videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the content, others will as well. And, of course, lock it in, especially on Saturday. We go nuts with post-game analysis across the board on our 24 team channels and, of course, right here as well. All right, what kind of value does BYU, Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati bring to the Big 12 in football? And is it good enough to sustain the Big 12 conference as a legitimate Power 5 conference? Let's check out the numbers and then put them into context. First, BYU. They play the most games against the Power 5. Why? Because they're an independent school that do not play conference games. Therefore, they round out most of their schedule against the Power 5. It's pretty much a split between the Power 5 and the Group of 5 for BYU, while the other three, of course, play 8 conference games in the American each year and typically only play 1 or 2 Power 5 teams per year. So BYU, going back to 2015, is 8-16 against the Power 5. Is that good? Of course, it's not good, but it's fairly credible. They have not been destroyed on a regular basis by the Power 5. 8-16 against the Power 5. A ton of those games coming against Utah because of rivalry purposes. Also, most of those games coming against the Pac-12. 3-10 against the Pac-12. Why does BYU play the Pac-12 so much? Well, of course, it's because of geography and against Utah being that rivalry game that they play just about every year. And we went back to 2015. Basically, I wanted to take the last 5 seasons as a sample, and I went back to 2015 because there just weren't many games, of course, in 2020 against the Power 5. So for BYU, it's 8-16 against the Power 5. They've only played 1 game against the Big 12, and we're throwing that out because, of course, these 4 will compete in the Big 12. BYU back in 2016 played West Virginia and lost 35-32. That was a 10-3 West Virginia team. BYU was 9-4 at the time. Their Power 5 opponents during this time, though, are 186 and 125. That's a close to 60% winning percentage. So BYU's played some good opponents. They've been outscored by 180 points. That sounds like a lot, and it's fairly substantial on a average basis at 7.5 points per game. There's where BYU stands. How about Houston? Less of a sample size going back to 2015. And, of course, Houston was a much different program in 2015 than they are now. Under Dana Holgorsen at 13-1, they won the Peach Bowl. They beat Florida State that year. Impressive performance. And, of course, beat Lamar Jackson and Louisville twice in 2 seasons in 2015 and 16, 36-10 and 34-31. Houston not as good right now, coming off a 3-5 campaign. 7-4 against the Power 5, and again, some of those wins mighty impressive. Houston is 44-28 themselves during this time. The Power 5 opponents they've played are 85-58. That's about 58% winning percentage. So some good teams. Again, 7-4 against the Power 5. They've outscored the Power 5 by 75 points. That's about 7 points per game in those 11 games. All right, on to Cincinnati. Best football program in the Group of 5 right now. Cincinnati, much like Houston, was a different program 5 years ago. Pre-Luke Fickell, they were only 7-6, 4-8, 4-8 in 2015, 16, and 17, but they are the best in the Group of 5 right now. Evidence not just by the record, but look at the performance in the Peach Bowl against a top 10 Georgia team, losing at the wire 24-21. Cincinnati is 46-28 during this time frame. They are 6-3 against the Power 5, and those Power 5 teams are 59-53, just slightly over 500. They played some really good teams like Georgia. Got blasted by Ohio State in 2019, a team that went to the college football playoff and beat the Bearcats 42-0. So they played the high end, but they've also played some bad UCLA teams, beat them up. Played a bad Purdue team in 2016, beat them by 18. They won a couple bowl games against Boston College and Virginia Tech out of the ACC. On to UCF. Much like 3 of the 4, a different program today than they were just back in 2015. They were 0-12. Then Scott Frost took over, led them to the pinnacle. They've dropped off slightly, coming off a big win, of course, against Boise State last week with Gus Malzahn now on the sideline. UCF 47-27 themselves during this 5-year plus stretch. 5-5 against the Power 5 with, of course, some of the more meaningful results against the Power 5. The marquee win against Auburn in the Peach Bowl of 2017. Of course, that Auburn team played in the SEC championship game, came within that game of going to the playoffs, had beaten the month prior 2 number 1 teams in 3 weeks, Georgia and Alabama. Oh, yeah, those 2 teams played in the national championship game. UCF beat Auburn by a touchdown. The next year, they played LSU in the Fiesta Bowl, lost by 8 to Joe Burrow and a top 10 LSU team. The most recent Power 5 game for UCF was just this past season. They were one of the few group of 5s to play a Power 5 in defeating Georgia Tech by 4 touchdowns. That Yellow Jacket team was only 3-7. So again, the Power 5 teams that UCF have played in these 10 games and going 5-5, 71-56. So about a 7-5 record per season. And they've outscored these teams by 15 points in 10 games. So that's only 1.5 points per game. All right, let's break down the math. These 4, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati, and UCF, during this 5+ years of football, have won 184 games. They've lost 113. Against the Power 5, they're 26-28. So they're significantly over 500, of course, against the rest of the group of 5 and the FCS. These 4 are 1-4 against the Big 12, so that's the conference they're going to play in, and they're going to be their new rivals. So that's West Virginia beat BYU, as we noted, in 2016. That's also Houston playing Oklahoma twice, splitting those games. They beat Baker Mayfield and company in 2016. They lost to the Sooners by 18 2 years ago. They split 2 games, high-scoring games against Texas Tech. UCF and Cincinnati have not played the Big 12. 1-4 for these 4 against the Big 12. They're 8-12 against the Pac-12, and as I stated, BYU's got most of those games. 8-1. These 4 are 8-1 against the ACC. The one loss was UCF losing to a Pitt team that went 8-5, lost that 35-34 in the last seconds. Otherwise, they blasted a Pitt team that went to the ACC championship game. And again, Houston beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl. They beat Louisville back-to-back years with Lamar Jackson. These 4 are 4-5 against the Big Ten. Couple losses to Michigan, a loss to Ohio State, against the SEC at 4-6. So basically, what the Big 12 is adding is, from a football standpoint, they're adding 4 West Virginias to a large degree. Yes, Cincinnati's much better than Houston right now, but putting them all together to generalize, they are mid-tier teams in the Big 12. That's what they should bring us over the next 5 to 10 years. What do they bring us when we put the numbers into context, looking forward in terms of intangibles and putting the football prowess in different terms? Well, BYU's the national brand. They're a quasi-Notre Dame national brand to a much lesser degree. They're known. They were one of the forerunners of bringing the passing offense to the game of college football, won a national championship in 1984, and they're known to a certain degree. Houston is intriguing because nobody goes to the games. They're not that well considered right now. The program's pretty marginal right now, although prior to the 3-5 finish last year, they went to bowl games before that every season that we are looking at. And again, Ed Oliver and company were tremendous, 13-1, top 10 team in 2015, but they've fallen since then. Houston brings a large television market that ignores them. It's an NFL city that watches the NFL, doesn't watch the Houston Cougars. Now, with play in the Big 12, could that come back to a certain extent? I would believe that their numbers would increase, but not substantially. Houston, of course, competed and were very relevant for decades in the Southwest Conference, which folded around 1994. And Houston was a program that competed heavily in the Southwest Conference for championships to go to the Cotton Bowl, the crown jewel of that conference. It was not unusual for Houston to be ranked on a fairly regular basis and even placed in the top 10 in the nation at times. The recruiting is phenomenal in Texas, and maybe Houston can grab more of those players and keep them at home if they played in a Power 5 conference. Next up is Cincinnati. Much like Houston, to a much lesser degree, TV market, top 30 to 35 in the nation. Not top 5 like Houston, but top 35 in the nation in Cincinnati. It's the best football program, best football team right now. But let's not get caught in the moment. That has much to do with the coach Luke Fickell. And Cincinnati's had a nice football history, but just a couple of years ago, the best team was Memphis. And right before that, it was Central Florida for a few years. And it's been Boise State, by and large, has been the gold standard for the last 20 years. So Cincinnati right now has the best football program, but that was not the case only 3 years ago. Cincinnati brings a decent TV market. Maybe the underlying benefit to adding Cincinnati is a pipeline of talent into Ohio and Pennsylvania. Not the recruiting wealth that it was 3 decades ago, but still top 7 to 10 states in the nation for high school football talent, which brings us to the real crown jewel, the wild card's UCF. UCF gets the Big 12 into Florida, along with Texas, the top 2 high school football playing states in America. Also with NIL, Disney's right there. Also, Orlando's a major market. Also, the alumni base is enormous. It's one of the largest schools in the country, UCF is, and they are committed to football. They've proven that over the last 5 years. UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU do not make the Big 12 what it was with Texas and Oklahoma. You are adding 4 programs that right now rank between 25 and 50 in the nation in regards to a football program. So you are strengthening and solidifying the middle of the conference. This is going to be somebody's decision, whether it's the College Football Playoff Selection Committee or somebody else, because we do not have a governing body to college football to determine, is this still a Power 5 conference? Because it's right on the edge. Your thoughts about the Big 12, the College Football Playoff going forward? Of course, this is a big decision for the Big 12. This stabilizes the conference, but it's going to be somebody's decision in terms of a playoff going forward and how they are judged. Because if they're just a group of 5, then they've got to fight for the one spot amongst everybody else. If they retain their Power 5 status, then they get the automatic berth. They get possibly a bye in the top 4. And their second and third and possibly fourth place teams are considered playoff teams as well. Your thoughts below, right here at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you next time. Lock it in, especially on Saturdays. Post-game all over the place. Best discussion, debate, and analysis right here at the Voice of College Football.